My father's casket was still being lowered into the ground when my stepmother chose that moment to destroy me. 47 family members stood in that October cemetery. And Vivian waited until the mechanical hum of the lowering device filled the silence before she stepped forward in her designer black suit and pointed at me like I was evidence in a courtroom. Before we let Sterling rest, she announced, her voice cutting through the cold air, there's something everyone needs to know about Brooke. My name on her lips sounded like poison. I'd known this woman for 8 years. Watched her rearrange our family photos so pictures of my mother were less visible. Listened to her subtle exclusions wrapped in sweet smiles. But even I hadn't imagined she would do this here. At his grave, while the dirt was still fresh, this girl, she said, pointing directly at me, has been living a lie for 32 years. She is not Sterling's biological daughter. The gasps came in waves. My Uncle Theodore dropped his prayer book into the mud. My cousin Mallory grabbed my arm. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God." I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My father had been dead for exactly 3 days, and Vivian was standing at his grave trying to erase me from his life entirely. Lying, I managed. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. She pulled out a folder she'd been hiding under her coat. Sterling's blood type was O negative. Brooke is OB positive. It's genetically impossible for him to be her father. I have the medical records right here. My stepbrother Dexter stood beside her, 6 feet of smug satisfaction in a $1,000 suit. "Sorry, sis," he said, dragging out the word like it was a joke. "Guess you're not really family after all. Mom's already spoken to lawyers about the will." The ground felt like it was tilting. This was the man who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me to my first day of teaching and called me every single Sunday night just to hear about my week. Sterling Caldwell, who owned 3 hardware stores across town and introduced me to every employee, every customer, always the same way. This is my daughter Brooke. She's going to be a teacher someday, and Vivian was standing at his grave telling everyone he wasn't my father. "How dare you?" my Aunt Greta finally said, her voice shaking. "At his funeral, Vivian." "Have you no shame?" "I'm just telling the truth," Vivian replied, wrapping herself in that fake sweetness she'd perfected. Sterling's real legacy belongs to his actual blood. To Dexter. That's when Mr. Harwell cleared his throat. He'd been standing quietly by the large oak tree, holding his briefcase with the stillness of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Franklin Harwell had been my father's lawyer and closest friend for 20 years. He'd been at my high school graduation, my college graduation, even my first school's parent-teacher night when I was nervous about meeting families. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his deep voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Before you continue this spectacle, perhaps we should discuss what Sterling left in my care." The confidence on Vivian's face cracked just slightly. "What are you talking about, Mr.?" Harwell walked forward with measured, deliberate steps. Sterling anticipated this might happen. 6 months ago, he came to my office with very specific instructions and a sealed package. He reached into his briefcase and produced a large manila envelope covered in my father's handwriting. He said, and I quote, "If Vivian tries to claim Brooke isn't my daughter at any point after my death, you are to immediately read this letter and play this recording. Do it publicly, Franklin. Don't let her poison people's minds in private." The cemetery went so quiet, I could hear distant traffic 2 streets over. 47 members of my family stood completely frozen. Even the funeral director, standing respectfully by his hearse, leaned forward slightly. On the front of the envelope, in Dad's careful handwriting, "To be opened only under circumstances discussed." And beneath that, "My daughter Brooke is my greatest achievement." My eyes burned. I refused to let the tears fall, even in death, even in this moment of calculated attack. Dad was still here, still protecting me, still calling me his daughter. "This is theatrical nonsense," Vivian said, but her voice had lost its edge. "I have medical records. Blood types don't lie." "Indeed they don't," Mr. Harwell agreed calmly. He reached back into his briefcase and produced a small digital recorder. Sterling was nothing if not thorough. He left both written documentation and his own recorded testimony. He looked at Vivian steadily. He also knew about your plans. He knew about the medical records you gathered. He knew about quite a lot, actually. That's why he made sure I had everything needed to protect his daughter from what he called posthumous character assassination. Dexter's smirk finally disappeared. He looked at his mother, then at Mr. Harwell, then at me. "This is a bluff," Vivian said, but her voice was shaking now. "Read the letter," I said. My voice was stronger than I expected, fueled by something I can only describe as my father still holding me up. "Let everyone hear what my father had to say. Mr. Harwell broke the seal with formal precision. The sound seemed to echo across every headstone in that cemetery. "Wait," Vivian said, her face now the color of the gray October sky. "We don't need to do this here. We can discuss this privately." "Oh, but you already made it public," Aunt Greta said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You started this show, Vivian. Let's see how it ends, Mr. Harwell adjusted his reading glasses and began to read the words my father had written 6 months ago, when he was still alive, still laughing, still calling me every Sunday night, but somehow already knowing this moment would come. I need to tell you who my father was before I tell you what that letter contained. Sterling Caldwell built his first hardware store with a $1,000 loan and his father's handshake philosophy. Good tools and honest advice could fix almost anything. By the time I was born, there were 3 locations. By the time I was 7 and my mother died of cancer, those stores had become the backbone of our life together. Every Saturday morning, we'd visit each one. Dad would let me help with inventory, teaching me to count washers and sort screws while telling me stories about Grandpa Caldwell. He'd introduce me to every employee the same way. "This is my daughter Brooke. She's going to be a teacher someday." The pride in his voice made me stand taller. Made me believe I could become anything. When Mom died, it was just us. 15 years of Sunday pot roasts and Saturday store visits and phone calls that never felt long enough. He never replaced her. He never tried to. He just loved me harder and made sure I knew it every single day. Then Vivian appeared. She swept into our lives when I was 22, fresh out of college and starting my first teaching job. She was beautiful in that polished way that made other women feel underdressed, blonde and manicured, and perfectly dressed in clothes that whispered money, even when she claimed to be struggling. She had a teenage son named Dexter, and a story about a difficult divorce and a need for stability. Dad fell hard. After years of dates that never went anywhere, of well-meaning setups that always ended with him saying she's lovely, but she's not Angela asterisk. Suddenly, he was bringing Vivian to Sunday dinners and introducing her to our life. "I want you to like her, Brooke," he told me one evening on the back porch, just the 2 of us. "I know nobody can replace your mother, but Vivian makes me happy, and Dexter needs stability." That boy's had a rough time, so I tried, I really did, but something was always off. The way Vivian's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. How the living room photos got quietly rearranged, so pictures of Mom were harder to find. The way she'd mention the store's property value in casual conversations, always followed by a little laugh. After they married, the exclusions started. Small at first, reasonable on their own. "Brooke, honey, wouldn't you be more comfortable eating in your room while Dexter and I help Sterling with the business plans?" Or, "Oh, did Sterling not mention? We're changing the Saturday visits. Dexter needs that time with his new father." Each one a calculated push. Each one moving me a little further from the center of my father's life. Dexter was worse when Dad wasn't around. At 15, he was already taller than me, with his features and calculating eyes. He'd make comments about being the only son, about carrying on the Caldwell name, about how the stores needed a man's touch. Around Dad, he was the perfect stepson. Eager, respectful, grateful. But Dad wasn't fooled, not entirely. He kept our Saturday visits just earlier in the morning. He kept my pictures prominent in his office. He kept my childhood room exactly as I'd left it. And he never once missed a Sunday night call. 3 weeks before his death, he called me over for dinner. Just the two of us, while Vivian was traveling with Dexter to look at colleges. He made Mom's pot roast, the recipe she'd taught him when they first married. We ate in comfortable silence before he gripped my hand across the table. "Brooke, there are things I need to tell you," he said. His fingers were still strong, still stained with oil from the stores, despite Vivian's endless complaints about his hands. "Not yet. The time isn't right. But remember, no matter what anyone says after I'm gone, you are my daughter. Blood doesn't make family, love does. And I've loved you since the moment your mother told me she was pregnant. Dad, you're scaring me. Just getting my affairs in order. A man my age needs to be prepared." He squeezed tighter. "I've made sure you're protected. Mr. Harwell has everything. Trust him if anything happens. You're a Caldwell, Brooke, my daughter, my true heir." Nothing and no one can change that. 4 days later, the heart attack took him. Quick, the doctor said, merciful. They found him at his original store, the one Grandpa started, sitting at his desk with a photo of Mom and me from my college graduation held in his hand. The funeral was everything he would have wanted. His employees formed an honor guard. The church overflowed with people whose lives he'd touched. His favorite hymns played softly as I stood at the podium and told them about Saturday mornings and Mom's pot roast and the Christmas Eve he stayed open until midnight because Mrs. Patterson needed a wrench to fix her grandson's bike. Sterling Caldwell believed tools could fix things, I'd said, gripping the podium to keep my hands from shaking. But his greatest tool was love. Vivian sat in the front row in a black Chanel suit, checking her expression like someone monitoring a performance. Dexter sat beside her checking his phone. They'd wanted to speak too, somehow never got around to preparing anything. Too grief-stricken, Vivian had told the minister, though I'd heard her that morning on the phone discussing property assessments. Now, standing at the grave, Mr. Harwell held my father's letter in both hands and began to read, "To my beloved daughter Brooke." I heard Vivian draw a sharp breath. What followed was my father's voice in written form, patient and steady and utterly certain. The same voice that had steadied me on that bicycle, that had called me every Sunday, that had made pot roast and held my hand and told me I was protected. He confirmed everything I already knew in my bones, that he had known about Vivian's plans, that he had spent 6 months quietly, methodically building a case to protect me, that the blood type argument, while technically accurate about biology, was something he had known about for 32 years, because he had been there when my mother, in a moment of terrified honesty early in their marriage, told him the truth. And his response, then and always, had been the same: "You are my daughter. I chose you. I have never for a single day of your life considered you anything other than mine." He had also, with his characteristic thoroughness, obtained his own legal documentation, a formal acknowledgement of paternity signed decades ago, ironclad under the laws of this state, witnessed and notarized and filed in a courthouse, not hidden in a desk drawer where Vivian could find it, filed properly, permanently. The stores, the letter made clear, had been placed into a trust structured specifically to ensure Vivian could not contest them. The terms had been drawn up 6 months ago, the same visit when Dad had handed Mr. Harwell the sealed envelope. Vivian was entitled to the house and a financial settlement per the prenuptial agreement she'd signed, the one she had apparently forgotten existed, or assumed she could circumvent. Dexter received nothing beyond what Dad had already given him in life. The letter ended simply, "Brooke, I knew you might be standing at my grave when you heard this. I knew because I know Vivian, and I know she would choose the moment when you were most vulnerable. So I want you to hear me one more time. You are my greatest achievement, not the stores. Not the legacy. You, the teacher. The girl who learned to ride a bike in our driveway and never once stopped being brave. I am so proud of you. I will always be proud of you. Take care of the stores. Take care of our people. And never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. You belong, Brooke. You have always belonged. Love, Dad." The cemetery was completely silent. Then my Aunt Greta started crying. Not the soft crying from before, but the deep, relieved kind that comes when something terrible has been stopped just in time. Uncle Theodore picked his prayer book up from the mud, straightened his jacket, and walked past Vivian without a word to come stand beside me. One by one, family members did the same. Vivian stood very still. The folder in her hands, her medical records, her carefully gathered evidence, her 6 months of planning, hung at her side like something she no longer knew what to do with. Her face had gone completely blank, the performance finally stripped away. Dexter looked at his mother, then at the ground. His phone was, for once, still. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Harwell said quietly, closing the letter with the same formal precision he'd used to open it. "I'll be in touch regarding the formal proceedings. I'd suggest retaining counsel." Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. Then she turned and walked away from my father's grave without another word, Dexter following a few steps behind her, his polished shoes finally picking up mud. I stood there long after most people had gone, after the funeral director had done his quiet, respectful work. After the last of the orange and gold leaves had drifted down from the trees, my father used to call God's way of showing off. "Mr. Harwell waited with me. He talked about you constantly," he said finally, his voice gentler now than it had been during the reading. "Every meeting, every phone call, every time I saw him. Always Brooke this, Brooke that, the teacher, his greatest achievement." I looked at the headstone. Sterling James Caldwell, beloved father, not stepfather, not guardian. Not any of the careful legal language the world likes to use when it wants to complicate love. Father, because that's what he was. That's what he chose to be, 32 years ago, and every single day since. He chose me the same way he chose every employee he ever hired, every customer he ever stayed late for, every family he ever helped, not because he had to, but because it was the right thing. And because love, real love, doesn't wait for biology to give it permission. The October air was cold and clean and still around me. I reached out and touched the headstone once, the way you touch something you want to remember the feeling of forever. "I've got you, Dad," I said quietly. "I'll never let it fall," and I meant every word.